Gymnastics demands perfection, but sometimes even the smallest mistake can have devastating consequences. 6 routines that began with confidence and control ended in disaster. 1 misplaced grip, 1 slip was all it took. These are the most horrifying gymnastics accidents ever recorded. It was April 23, 2015, when 16-year-old Emily Carter was practicing at her usual gymnastics gym in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Emily had been coming to this gym for 8 years, ever since she was a little kid. She lived nearby, so it was easy for her family to bring her to practice. Everyone at the gym knew Emily well. She was especially talented on the balance beam, which is one of the most challenging pieces of gymnastics equipment. The balance beam is only 4 inches wide and sits about 4 feet off the ground. It takes incredible skill and focus to perform on it. That afternoon, Emily was working on one of her most difficult routines. The move she was practicing involved doing a backflip on the narrow beam, then immediately jumping off while spinning her body in a full twist before landing on the mat. Her coaches had been watching Emily practice this routine for weeks. They noticed she could do the backflip part really well, but she often moved too quickly into the twisting jump that came after. They had talked to her about slowing down between the 2 parts of the move, but it was hard to remember when she was focused on not falling. That afternoon, Emily climbed onto the balance beam to run through her routine one more time. She moved carefully across the narrow surface, keeping her arms stretched out to help her stay balanced. Everything looked normal as she performed the first half of her routine. When Emily reached the middle of the beam, she began her backflip. Her coach and 2 of her teammates were watching from below. They saw her complete the backflip successfully, just like she had done many times before. But as she prepared for the twisting jump, something went wrong. Emily started to lose her balance. Her left foot slipped a little on the beam, and her body began tipping forward. She tried to catch herself by throwing her arms out, but it was too late to stop what was happening. Her chest and shoulder hit the beam first, which hurt her upper body. As she fell and spun around, her head and neck hit a spot where 2 mats came together. One mat was a bit thinner than the other, which made a small raised edge that didn't cushion the hit completely. The mats helped soften some of the force, but the way she was spinning and the bad angle made the blow very serious. The coaches rushed over immediately. They told all the other athletes to step back and give Emily space. Emily wasn't moving at all. Her body lay still, and her head was positioned in a way that looked very concerning. Doctors then revealed she had broken several bones in her neck and suffered severe injuries to her head and brain. Despite the medical team's best efforts, including emergency surgery, Emily's injuries were too serious, and she died that evening. The gym owners began investigating the accident right away. They wanted to understand exactly what had happened and whether anything could have prevented it. They interviewed everyone who witnessed the fall, carefully examined the balance beam and all the safety equipment, and reviewed how everything had been set up that day. Their investigation showed that all the equipment met safety standards and had been properly maintained. The beam itself was in perfect condition, and the protective mats were positioned correctly according to gymnastics safety rules. Though investigators noted a small seam where 2 mats met. The accident had been caused by Emily's loss of balance during an extremely difficult skill, combined with her misjudged landing and the minor gap in the mats, not by any equipment problems or safety violations. It was June 12, 2018, when 17-year-old Arav Mehta walked into the city gymnasium in Pune, India, for his daily Malakamba practice. The gym was full of energy that afternoon. Several athletes were working on different wooden poles and ropes scattered around the large room. Coaches moved between their students, giving advice and pointing out ways to improve their moves. Malakamba is a traditional Indian sport that combines gymnastics with wrestling. Athletes climb, spin, and perform tricks on a tall wooden pole that's planted firmly in the ground. It takes incredible strength, balance, and years of practice to master even the basic moves. Arav had been doing Malakamba since he was 10 years old, slowly learning how to climb the pole, spin around it, and hang upside down in different positions. The wooden pole in the center of the gym stood 10 feet tall and was smooth from years of use by countless athletes. Around its base was thick padding designed to cushion falls and protect the gymnasts when they dismounted from their moves. Arav was working on a particularly challenging move that he had been practicing for weeks. The skill required him to climb the pole barefoot, wrap his arms and legs tightly around the smooth wood, and then flip his entire body upside down. While hanging in this inverted position, he would spin his body in a controlled rotation before letting go and dropping down to land on the padded area below. The move required a lot of strength, perfect timing, and good balance all at the same time. Even though Arav had done this move before, his foot placement and timing weren't always the same. These small differences could make his body tilt the wrong way while spinning, and once he started the move, there was no time to fix mistakes. When Arav climbed onto the pole that afternoon, his arms wrapped securely around the wooden surface, his legs gripped tightly, and he lowered his head slightly as he began to flip his body upside down. The entire gym seemed to go quiet for a moment as everyone watched him spin in the inverted position, his body fully stretched out and under complete control. Everything looked perfect as Arav reached the point where he needed to release his grip and begin his descent to the mat below. But in that critical split second, something went wrong. His left hand slipped just slightly on the smooth wooden pole. The slip was so slight that most people watching didn't even notice it at first, but it was enough to alter his body's rotation slightly. This tiny change in his spin meant that instead of falling straight down toward the center of the thick padding, Arav's body twisted in midair and moved sideways. He struck the edge of the padded base instead of landing safely in the middle. The impact made his body hit the hard wooden floor under the padding very hard, and his head struck the corner of the wooden platform that wasn't covered. The coaches immediately sprinted toward Arav, but it was clear that the fall had already caused serious damage. Arav lay completely still, his body twisted in an unnatural position that showed something was very wrong. Several other gymnasts who had been working on nearby equipment watched in shock. They remembered how controlled and precise Arav usually was with his movements. The coaches were also struggling to understand what had happened. Every safety measure had been in place, and Arav was an experienced athlete who knew the risks. Yet one tiny slip on the pole had changed everything in an instant. The medical team arrived quickly, but Arav's injuries from the fall were too severe. He died from the trauma to his head and body. The gym fell silent in the aftermath, with conversations reduced to whisper and the normal rhythm of practice completely stopped. Other athletes slowly returned to their routines, but the image of Arav's fall stayed with everyone who witnessed it. It was September 15, 2017, when 14-year-old Lena Fischer attended her weekly wheel training session at the Gymnastics Club in Leipzig, Germany. For Lena, wheel gymnastics wasn't just a hobby, it had become a big part of her life. She first tried the sport when she was just 8, and now, at 14, she was one of the more skilled athletes at her club. This sport is called Rennrad in German, and it's quite different from regular gymnastics that most people know about. The wheel itself is an impressive piece of equipment. It stands about as tall as a person and is made of steel tubing formed into a perfect circle. Inside the wheel are wooden handles and crossbars that athletes grab onto and step on to control their movement. Gymnasts climb inside this giant wheel and use their hands and feet to make it roll, spin, and flip in different directions across the gym floor. Wheel gymnastics requires incredible strength, especially in the arms and core muscles. Athletes also need perfect timing and coordination because they're controlling a heavy piece of equipment while their body is moving in all directions. Even small mistakes can cause the wheel to tip over or crash into the hard gym floor, potentially hurting the person inside. The routine Lena chose to practice that Friday was ambitious, even for someone with her experience. She planned to perform a series of forward flips while rolling across the floor, then transition into a full spin while standing upright, before finishing with a dramatic leap from the moving wheel. What made this sequence particularly challenging wasn't just the individual moves, but how quickly she had to switch between them while maintaining control of the heavy steel apparatus. While Lena generally handled the wheel well, she sometimes had trouble judging her momentum when switching from a spinning motion into a forward flip. The timing had to be absolutely perfect, even during fast sequences. As Lena climbed into the wheel and began her routine, her movements looked smooth and controlled. She rolled the wheel forward and backward across the gym floor, leaning her body and adjusting her position to match the rhythm of the spinning apparatus. Several teammates and coaches watched closely, impressed by how fast and confident she looked. Everything seemed to be going perfectly as she prepared for the final forward flip before her dismount. But at that critical moment, something went wrong. Lena slightly misjudged how fast the wheel was rotating. Her feet slipped on the inner crossbars, and her body shifted just enough to throw off the wheel's balance. The heavy steel wheel tilted suddenly to one side, and Lena found herself off-center and unable to control what was happening. She tried to correct her position and regain her balance, but the speed and angle of the wheel's rotation made it impossible for her to regain control. The wheel was tipping faster than she could react to fix the problem. Lena's body began rotating uncontrollably inside the metal frame. Her torso struck one of the steel bars of the wheel with tremendous force. At almost the same time, her head collided hard with the gym floor. The impact was sudden and violent. The coaches immediately rushed over, shouting for everyone else to step back and give Lena space. Lena lay motionless inside the wheel, her body positioned unnaturally against the metal frame and gym floor. The combination of the high-speed rotation, the impact of her torso and head striking the steel and hard floor, and the lack of any protective padding around the wheel made her injuries extremely severe. Medical responders arrived quickly, but Lena's injuries were too serious to survive. She died from the trauma caused by the impacts with the wheel and floor. In the days that followed, the accident was discussed quietly among athletes and staff members. The wheel was eventually set upright again, and practice resumed. But Lena's fall served as a sobering reminder to everyone about how quickly a slight mistake could have devastating consequences. It was May 14, 2017, when 15-year-old Camille Dubois walked into her gymnastics club in Lyon, France, ready for a tough practice. She wasn't training by herself that day. Camille was part of a 3-person team that did acrobatic gymnastics, where athletes work together to show off strength, balance, and coordination. Camille was the flyer, the person who gets lifted, thrown, and caught. The other 2 girls were the bases. They provided the strong support that made Camille's moves in the air possible. Acrobatic gymnastics is different from regular gymnastics. Teams of 2 to 4 people work together to do moves like handstands on top of each other, human pyramids, and throws where one person flies through the air and gets caught by teammates. Everything depends on trust, timing, and working together perfectly. What makes this sport dangerous is that once the flyer is in the air, they can't control anything. They have to trust their bases to throw them right, watch where they're going, and catch them safely. The bases have to guess exactly where the flyer will be and move quickly if something goes wrong. Camille's gym had normal padded floors like most gyms, but didn't have the extra thick crash mats that some teams use for high throws. Her team had been practicing their routine for several weeks, slowly working up to harder moves as they got better at working together. That afternoon, the team decided to try a very hard skill. They would throw Camille about 6 feet in the air. She would spin around twice, and then they would catch her. Everything had to work perfectly. The throw, how Camille spun, and when the bases got ready to catch her. They had tried this move before, but it didn't always work, while they could do easier throws just fine. This one needed perfect timing that was hard to get right. When they got ready to try it, Camille stepped onto her teammates' locked hands. She felt their strong grip on her waist and feet as they prepared to throw her up. The whole gym got quiet as other teams stopped to watch. The throw began smoothly. Camille felt herself rising into the air, her body automatically moving into the tight spinning position she had practiced hundreds of times. Her arms were tucked close to her body, legs straight and together as she began her rotations. From the ground, it looked like everything was going exactly as planned. But somewhere in the middle of her second rotation, something shifted. One of her bases had miscalculated Camille's spinning speed by just a fraction of a second. This tiny error caused Camille's body to tilt slightly off its intended path. Instead of spinning straight up and down, she began rotating at an angle that carried her sideways through the air. The change happened so quickly that Camille's bases couldn't adjust fast enough. They reached out to catch her, but she was no longer falling where they expected her to be. Camille crashed down onto the padded floor, but at such an awkward angle that she hit the edge where the thick gymnastics mat met the harder gym surface underneath. Her upper back struck first, absorbing some of the impact, but the angle and speed of her fall caused her head and neck to hit with tremendous force. The sound echoed through the gym, causing everyone to stop what they were doing. Coaches and teammates immediately rushed toward her, but it was clear from the way Camille lay motionless that something terrible had happened. Other teams stopped their routines entirely, and worried whispers began to spread as everyone tried to understand what had gone wrong. Camille's body was twisted in a way that showed the uncontrolled nature of her fall, and her teammates stood nearby in shock, knowing that their small timing error had caused this tragedy. Medical responders arrived as quickly as possible, but Camille's injuries from the high-speed impact were too severe to survive. It was October 8th, 2019 in Gymnastics Club in Milan, buzzed with its usual energy. Athletes filled every corner of the space. Among them was 16-year-old Michael Rossi, who had come in for what he expected would be just another practice session. Michael wasn't training alone that afternoon. He was working with his teammate and friend, 17-year-old Lorenzo Bianchi. Both boys specialized in double mini trampoline, a sport where athletes sprint toward a short two-section trampoline, launch themselves into the air to perform flips and twists, then land on a thick mat. What made their training particularly challenging was that they practiced tandem sequences, coordinated skills where both gymnasts performed their moves one right after the other in rapid succession. This training needs both athletes to work together perfectly since they use the same landing area just seconds apart. The double mini trampoline makes it harder because it shoots gymnasts forward very fast instead of straight up like a normal trampoline. So even small mistakes can send someone the wrong way. Michael and Lorenzo had chosen to work on a tandem sequence they had been practicing for several weeks. The plan was for Michael to go first, running toward the trampoline and launching into a full twisting flip before landing in the center of the mat. As soon as Michael cleared the landing area, Lorenzo would immediately follow with his own similar move, carefully avoiding the path his teammate had just traveled. Both boys understood how critical the timing was for this skill. Even being off by a fraction of a second could create a dangerous situation where their paths might cross while one or both of them were still in the air. Michael started his approach, running at full speed toward the trampoline. He hit the equipment cleanly and launched himself into the air, his body rotating smoothly as he completed his twisting flip. As he came down to land, however, his momentum carried him slightly forward on the mat. Not dramatically, but enough to put him a few inches ahead of where he normally would have been. The landing sent a small jolt through Michael's body, and he felt himself go a little off balance. He quickly recovered, using his arms and legs to absorb the impact and regain his stability. From where the coaches were watching, everything looked like it had gone according to plan. Lorenzo began his approach immediately, just as they had practiced. He sprinted toward the trampoline and launched himself into the air, tucking his body tightly to complete his rotation. But Michael's slightly forward landing had affected the timing of the entire sequence by just a few crucial moments. Lorenzo's trajectory through the air was fractionally different than it should have been. His spin carried him a few inches to the side, putting him on a path that intersected with where Michael was still recovering from his own landing. In midair, Lorenzo's shoulder grazed Michael's back. The contact was brief, but it was enough to jolt both gymnasts and throw off Lorenzo's carefully controlled rotation. Michael stumbled from the unexpected contact, but managed to keep his balance and stay mostly on the padded landing area. He felt a sharp pain in his shoulder where Lorenzo had hit him, but he seemed to be okay overall. Lorenzo wasn't as fortunate. The collision had altered his spinning motion, and instead of landing cleanly in the center of the mat, he was thrown off to the side. His off-angle rotation carried him beyond the edge of the protective padding. He struck the hard end of the trampoline bed before crashing onto the unpadded gym floor below. his body twisting violently as he hit. The sound of Lorenzo's impact echoed throughout the gym. Mikhail immediately ran to his friend. Other athletes stepped back uncertainly, while coaches sprinted across the floor to reach Lorenzo. Lorenzo lay motionless on the hard floor, his body positioned in a way that made it clear he had suffered serious injuries from the fall. Both boys were rushed to the hospital immediately. Mikhail recovered after treatment for minor bruising and a shoulder strain. Lorenzo's injuries from the high-speed collision with the trampoline and floor were much more severe, and despite the medical team's efforts, he died later that day. It was July 18, 2016, when 17-year-old James Downey entered the gymnastics facility in Stuttgart, Germany, ready for another demanding day at summer training camp. The gym buzzed with energy as dozens of athletes from across Europe worked to improve their skills. James wanted to try the vertical rope climb that day, an exercise that would test his strength and endurance in a different way than his usual competitive routines. Rope climbing might seem simple compared to the complex flips and twists that define modern gymnastics, but it's actually one of the most demanding strength tests an athlete can face. The exercise requires tremendous grip strength, powerful core muscles, and perfect coordination between the arms and legs. While rope climbing is no longer part of official gymnastics competitions, many serious athletes still use it as a training tool because it develops the upper body power needed for events like the rings and high bar. The rope hung 20 feet from ceiling to floor, with thick safety mats placed around its base. The most challenging part wasn't just climbing to the top, but releasing from that height and landing safely on the mats below. James had been working on a particularly difficult variation of this exercise for several weeks. His goal was to climb all the way to the top, then swing his body out from the rope before releasing and landing in the center of the mats below. This move combined the strength needed to reach the summit with the precision required for a controlled aerial release. James began his climb with steady, practiced movements, gripping the rope firmly as he pulled himself toward the top. When James reached the 20-foot mark at the top, he took a brief moment to steady himself and prepare for the most challenging part of the exercise. He shifted his legs into position and prepared to push away from the rope, beginning the swinging motion that would set up his release and descent to the mats below. But in that critical instant, something went wrong. James's right hand slipped slightly on the rope's rough surface, possibly due to sweat or a momentary misjudgment. It was a tiny error, the kind of minor grip adjustment that wouldn't matter much if it happened closer to the ground. But at 20 feet in the air, with James committed to his swinging release, this small slip became catastrophic. The slip changed everything about James's planned trajectory. Instead of swinging out cleanly and dropping straight down toward the center of the safety mats, his body tilted forward and to the side. He was no longer aligned properly for a safe landing, and there was no time to correct his position while falling through the air. James's torso and head struck the edge of the mat, where it met the harder gym floor underneath. The impact was amplified by the full height of his fall, creating forces that even the protective padding couldn't absorb. The sound of the collision echoed sharply throughout the large gym, causing everyone to freeze in place. James lay motionless across the mats and exposed floor, his body positioned in a way that showed he had suffered severe injuries from the impact. Despite the safety measures that had been in place, the combination of the height, his misalignment during the fall, and the off-center landing had created an unsurvivable situation. The tragedy left everyone at the camp in shock. James died from his injuries, and the rope climb that was meant to build strength had instead caused an irreversible loss. Thanks for watching. But remember, every climb, every jump, carries its own cost. The next story is waiting on the end screen. Click it if you're ready to witness another final ascent.